Right, confirmation that this is all being recorded, so we get to share it with you in real time. And those of you joining us at a later time, we're so happy to have you involved as well. My name's Louisa. I'm so delighted to always be a cohort with Jen Blankfein in our book events. I have the privilege of welcoming all of you here, and of course of welcoming Barbara Linn Probst to join us to talk about her lovely novel, Color of Ice. It was so nice to be taken on an adventure with Catherine. Such an exciting thing to do, such a wonderful place to go. So I'm really excited to hear more about that as well. Just a couple housekeeping things. If you have questions that come up that you would like to ask, go ahead and plop those in the chat. I'll be keeping my eye on those. We often find in these that people have similar questions, so I'll sort of see if there's a trend of something that people are really interested to know, and then I'll pop in with that. But any question you have, of course, is most welcome. And I think that's it for housekeeping, right?
That's it.
Okay,
Yep.
so then I will move forward to introduce our lovely hostess, Jennifer Blankfein, and she will take it from here.
Thank you so much, Louisa, and welcome everyone, and welcome Barbara. We're so happy to have you. I'm going to start out just reading a bit of your bio, and then we'll get into it all. So here we go. This is written on Barbara's website, so it's in her voice. I've embraced many sides of life. I've been a teacher, therapist, qualitative researcher, educational advocate, serious amateur pianist, and full-time mom. I've run a non-for-profit organization, mentored PhD students, counseled families, done webinars and radio interviews on how to nurture out-of-the-box children, and much more. I've had many homes. I've lived in a cabin in the California redwoods, a firehouse, a converted sauna in the heart of Greenwich Village, and lots of places in between. I now live on a historic dirt road in New York's Hudson Valley. I've looked and listened. I've traveled from Iceland to Israel, Scotland to Spain. I spent time in Italy, Egypt, Alaska, Costa Rica, Turkey, France, and along the backpacking trails of the US and Canada. I've spoken up. I've given talks to dozens of parent groups, professional organizations, and academic conferences all over the country. Through all of it, I've never stopped writing. Barbara Linn Probst is an award-winning author of contemporary women's fiction. Her acclaimed novels, Queen of the Owls and The Sound Between the Notes, were medalists for prestigious national awards, and The Sound Between the Notes was selected by Kirkus Reviews as one of the best indie books of 2021. Barbara has also published over 50 essays on the craft of writing for sites such as Jane Friedman and Writer Unboxed, along with 2 nonfiction books. Her third novel, The Color of Ice, was released in October of 2022. And most recently, she was just invited to teach a course at the Kauai Writers Conference. So welcome, Barbara. You are very accomplished and have been everywhere and done everything. So I can't wait to hear about it all.
Makes me sound tired. I feel tired just listening to it.
Luckily, we're all home, so you can rest while you're talking.
Yeah. But you know, it is the best preparation for being a novelist, is to live and to be interested in people. And so
I would guess that helps with your ideas, where you have a lot to think about all the time. How long have you been writing?
Well, I actually wrote my first book when I was 7 years old. It's in a box in the attic somewhere. It was called At Home with Us, and it had illustrations, and it was so I've always been writing one thing or another. You know, I wrote nonfiction for a long time, but fiction was my first love, and I'm really privileged to have been able to return to it after doing other things.
Wow. Now, you published 3 books in 3 years. So how did you do that? I mean, that is a lot to get out of one person in such a short time. And are you going to be publishing a book a year? Is that your path?
No, I have to explain. I didn't write 3 books in 3 years. So the truth is, my second book, The Sound Between the Notes, I had written it earlier. And I kept working on it. Something wasn't right. And it was actually going to be published, but I changed my mind and I just took it away and I published Queen of the Owls first. And then because Sound Between the Notes was about a pianist, and I took this music intensive one the next summer, and I understood that I had made my protagonist too edgy and bitter and snarky. And that's what was wrong with her, because you can't play Chopin and Brahms and if you're angry. So when I understood that, something clicked. And then I was able to go and just tweak that novel so that I could release it fairly soon after Queen of the Owls. It just needed one more layer of sensitivity, of heart. So that was really a special thing. And now The Color of Ice was another, I think, a unique experience, because I was stuck in my house for 4 months during COVID. I had no life. So I would literally, I sat on my deck and I just lost myself in this story world, in this kind of enchanted state, when all I did was work on the story, which I wouldn't have been able to do in my, regular life. And I couldn't do it like that now, but it was this special period. So that was how it kind of emerged from me. But I don't think that's going to happen again. So
I think it probably was to your benefit, because you avoided that angst of getting out that sophomore novel that everyone always talks about as being so difficult, and you had already finished it. So it kind of just came out on its own, and it gives you a little bit of momentum when it comes to marketing all of your books together, I would think.
It's really true. And I see a question in the chat that I can respond to right away, which is that, when I was working on The Sound Between the Notes, it's also a story about adoption, family, belonging, mothers, daughters, and it was framed around music, but I wasn't thinking of it as a musical novel. And Queen of the Owls was inspired by an experience I had with one of Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings. So when they were both published within a year of each other, I sort of looked at them and I said, well, they're like a set about art. And so I had this inspiration about glass blowing, and I can answer the question and tell you the whole story either now or later. But all of my ideas sort of find me. Like, I didn't set out. I'm not a glass blower, So you want me to tell? I could tell the story.
Yeah.
But I can go out of order. Who cares, right?
Yeah, no, tell it.
Yeah. So what happened was, I was like a complete exhausted wreck getting ready for Queen of the Owls. And I had done the last edits, and I wanted to do something like wild that I had never done, that seemed like a really, sort of cool thing to do. And there was a glass blowing place in the next town over. So I signed up for a lesson. And while I was having this lesson, I asked the woman if I could come back and just observe her, because it was really interesting. So she showed me a few things about glass blowing, and I'll share one of them with you, which is that the glass is formed on a rod called the punti rod. And when you're finished creating this object, in order for it to survive, you have to break it free from this pipe on which it was formed. If you don't break it free, it will cool and shatter, and its beauty will be lost. Its existence will be over. So I thought, oh my gosh, that's a story. Somebody who is formed in a particular place or thanks to a particular person, her beauty emerges, but she has to break free and leave that in order to go on. And so it really was this inspiration from one of the properties of glass blowing that gave me my story idea.
Do the people that you took that lesson from, do they know that you've written all about it?
Yes. And then I went around at night after that, I went and I met a lot of glass blowers, and, it was such fun research. I mean, I went to glass blowing exhibits and, met lots of people, and, all that kind of stuff, which is what I do. I did have another lesson. I mean, you couldn't say that well, one thing I did was, I don't know if you know the Netflix series Blown Away. So I became addicted to that, of course. But I had the the co-host, Catherine Gray, read the novel and make sure that I got it right technically. So that made me feel really good. And she blurbed it. So that was, that was
That's
really, and the more I got into even just learning about it, the more it opens the story metaphors to me, because glass is, when you work with it, it's molten, neither liquid nor solid. It's always in a state of becoming. The artist has to dance with it and respond to it. So this became a metaphor for Catherine's awakening, her openness to becoming something new, and of course to her relationship with Mac, because it was, one had to be responsive and open to the unexpected. So glass taught me a lot.
So when you were learning about glass blowing, that's how the idea of your character came about? When you're learning the properties of glass, then you're thinking about it as it would manifest in a person, and then you created your character? Or
No, that's a fair question, but I think a lot of things were bubbling up at the same time. I had this, so when I was in this glass blowing studio and I had this idea, I remembered my trip to Iceland, and I asked the woman if you could capture this blue, luminous blue ice in glass. And she said, like, duh, sure. So then suddenly this iceberg Iceland thing appeared. And I had this image of this woman who was cold in a way and contained. Yeah, I guess, but all of it began sort of emerging like in a dance simultaneously. And for me, the process of creation is not linear. There's a lot in forming and informing each other. And I think of it actually as a conversation between this very intellectual part, which is plotting out plot points and stuff, and something very subconscious and intuitive, where these ideas arise and might end up coming to my consciousness like in the shower, So all of this
I
was
know.
happening sort of in a very global, nonlinear way.
It's amazing. Now, your trip to Iceland was before the glass blowing.
Yes.
So how did it get to be part of the story?
Yeah, like when I was there, I was just a tourist, and I just was. And I mean, it's an incredible place to visit. So I had lots of impressions, lots of photos. The one that I put up of me in front of the blue iceberg is actually the only one of me in the whole trip. The rest of them are scenery. So, but then, as I said, I was somehow thinking of glass, the luminosity, and ice, because glass has the property that we can look both at it and through it. So does ice. And ice is also ever changing. In fact, the icebergs are not fixed. They respond to the wind, to the temperature, to the movement of the water. And so they're always changing as well. So the more I began to see these parallels, and I remember this incredible place I had been to called Jökulsárlón. So I was like, wow, okay, this is the setting. It just came to me. And then, of course, I had all my photos, and then anything I couldn't remember, there was the good old internet. So it was the kind of thing where the story could have been set nowhere else. Like Queen of the Owls could have happened in any university town. But this book was so embedded in landscape, in the light, in the thermal pools, the icebergs, the northern lights, the mountains of the volcanoes. It's just so much embedded in Iceland, and I didn't know it until it began happening.
Did you take notes when you were on that trip, or no? Because you were just a tourist.
Right.
So
But
it was all
it's
from
in you.
memory.
It's in you. It's in your body. And one of the great things about getting into this creative zone is you have access to stuff that you didn't realize that you knew. You can make connections. So that's why this book, more than the other two, was very magical for me. And I felt at the time as if I was sort of being allowed to tell their story. But yeah, I mean, if you've read it, those who've read it will know that the setting is so intrinsic to this story. So
Yeah. So in all three of your books, you've included some kind of art form, which you said ultimately became a theme, and maybe you'll continue with that with your next book. I don't know if it inspires you, we'll see. But that you also write a lot about women having a second chance, or coming into their own, or getting back a piece of them that they've put aside. Where does that idea come from? And is that consciously chosen for a character in each of your books?
yeah, it's a very central concept for me personally. I mean, it started with Queen of the Owls, which was the story of a woman who had thought of herself as a brain and really was out of touch with her sensuality, her body. Well, duh, that was my story as a kid. You know, I remember when I had a crush on this guy when I was 12, and I asked my girlfriend to ask him what he thought of me. And he said, "Oh, Barbara, she's a brain." Ah, I wanted him to say she's a fox, So that was my personal journey. I mean, the book's not autobiographical, it's not catharsis, but that was something I understood about each of us, I believe, has parts of ourselves we haven't nurtured enough because we make choices along the way. We have to. And so there's something in each of my characters that she needs to reclaim and integrate in order to be a more complete person. And this is something that maybe it comes from my background as a therapist, but it is a common thread in my protagonists. And I feel that they have different things, but there's something about this search for wholeness and authenticity, which maybe doesn't present itself in your 20s. Maybe it's a little later in life when you have a certain life and you know that there's a part of you that you still need to bring forward and let it become more vibrant,
Yeah. It's powerful. I think it's relatable for lots of people. It definitely is, it drew me into all of the stories. I think I was curious to know what the journey was going to be for all of the leading women in all of your books. So in The Color of Ice, there's some romance, but is this a romance novel, or can you talk to us a little bit about what it's called, what this
Yeah.
genre would be
Yeah.
called?
I mean, a romance novel is defined by the fact that it's got a happy ever after sort of ending. And I don't want to spoil the book for anyone who hasn't read it, but the ending is more complex, let's just say. It's not depressing. I mean, people have gotten, actually the ending, I didn't know it was going to end that way. That was an inspiration, but it's more, and it's more literary. And so I didn't know what to call it. I've never been comfortable with the term women's fiction, which is another conversation. And I didn't know what to call it. And the funny thing was that I don't know how this happened. I came across this article. Apparently there's a genre that is not usually used, the label isn't used, called a literary romance. And that is really what this is. It's more complex, has many layers, not so simplistic, is about growth. So that's really what I would call this book. It's a love story. She learns to love. This is somebody whose journey is toward a quality of goodness and generosity and the capacity for unconditional love that she didn't know she was capable of. And that is a love story in the profoundest sense. And of course, she owns that capacity now. She believes She knows she is capable, but she didn't know that in the beginning. So love stories can be much more nuanced than just getting the guy.
Right. It's not really about a couple, a love story between a couple. It's about a love story, her capacity to have love or to give love.
And I mean, I felt during the pandemic that I wanted to only write about things that were really worth writing about the human call to be better people, to rise to what we're capable of in terms of compassion and all of those things that we see the need for it in this world so much.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about this, but when Catherine is having this reawakening and she's with Mac and she's in Iceland and she's recognizing her need for passion and vulnerability and taking risk. Do you think that Iceland, the location, had an impact on her as much as Mac, or was it a combination?
Well, that's interesting. I think it was both of them. I mean, whenever we're in a strange place, out of our comfort zone, away from our habits, at least my experience is I'm more open. And she had gone there on a job. And so she had this idea she was going to do this little best of Iceland, super programmed, ring road trip, which is of course what I did when I was there. And she meets this guy, or she's supposed to send there to interview him, and he intrigues her. And something in her, it must be hungry for this. So little by little, she deviates from her plans, starting small ways to larger ways. And she's affected by the landscape. I mean, there's key scenes at the thermal underground hissing, bubbling things of Heverir. There's a key scene at the big waterfall. These scenes that could have happened nowhere else because of the power of nature in these eerie, weird, I mean, this place of Heverir, which I'll never forget being there. It's like you're on Mars. It's just not like a place on Earth. So one is just outside of one's comfort zone, So for sure, I don't think even traveling like in France that this would have happened, because the other thing with Mac, he is intriguing to her. He's enigmatic, but also very charismatic. And, when I've given my little log lines about the book, I used to say, she meets a glassblower who awakens her hunger for passion and risk and vulnerability. And then I started not liking that, because it's not like he does it, like she's just lying there and he is the magic, prince with the, she is ready and she lets herself respond instead of cutting it. So if that makes sense, I mean, another kind of man might not have had this effect on her, but it isn't like she's not passive. Everything is her choice. She chooses to reverse her route. She chooses to extend her stay. She's very much, it's her agency.
Right. And he wasn't the magic bullet, but he did, the fact that he was doing this glass blowing and using his air to blow into the glass and make something beautiful, he was sort of the agent that was creating that glass blowing, which I think had a lot to do with her changing also.
Yeah, she was attracted to everything about glass blowing also, and the sense of lack of control, which was a very key thing for her to have to be willing to not be in control.
So we don't know what is really going on with Mac all the time. He kind of holds himself back. He doesn't share quite so much. And we've already said that the big journey was really Catherine's journey that she was on, but he facilitates her personal growth. how do you decide on the inner journeys of these female characters? And
Um,
yeah,
well, before I answer, I want to just, at the first part, we learn her backstory fairly early in the book. By page 100, we know there's a big delay in learning his backstory because when he finally tells her, that is what calls her to her first act of a certain kind of generous response. So his backstory, we do learn it, and it's very important. But yes, it's her. She's the one who's undergoing the transformation. And although she's the agent of his redemption and his healing, she gives that back to him. So there's a reciprocity. But when I look at what is my character missing, what did they yearn for? And so that to find that missing thing is the inner journey. So what was kind of cool about this book, of course, is that there was an outer journey and an inner journey that spoke to each other. But her inner journey, you know, she was somebody, just, I don't think I'll spoil the book for those who haven't read it by saying this, because her husband died young in this freak accident for which she felt very guilty. She had 2 children, both somewhat difficult in different ways. She had to be like super mom, like, and in her career, you know, getting everything done, multitasker, super competent. And so she needed to do that. But they're at the price of her own vulnerability, her own fire, her own art, her own heart, really. And so her journey is to that reclaim those parts of herself that she had put in a drawer for very good reasons. I'm not meaning to say she shouldn't have, but this is what interests me about people, is when is it time to risk letting yourself long for what you don't have. The first step is letting yourself want it.
and when she does start to come out of this repression of feelings, her relationships with her children change.
Absolutely. And to me, that's really critical in a book, that your protagonist's change is going to affect those around her. And so much better if all the better if that allows the secondary characters to have their own arc of growth. So her relationship with her children is, you could say, a subplot that is also has its own journey. She doesn't deliberately go out to make them change, but circumstances and her absence and all sorts of things facilitate that.
Yeah. Now, Catherine has a lot of guilt surrounding the death of her husband. Why did you include that? I mean, he could have just died and she didn't have to feel that guilt. Why is that important to the story?
Okay, well, all I'll say without ruining it is that it was meant to be, and is, a bit of a foreshadow or an echo of part of Mac's story. So I'm always interested in my writing to have themes and motifs that repeat, that you can find threaded through, like this breath. The idea of breath is threaded through in many ways. The idea of water is threaded. So this idea of guilt that maybe is not really merited is threaded, and it's part of course, the redemption, the forgiveness, the healing.
So I have a technical question. If you're threading these ideas through the whole book, how do you keep track of that? Do you have to keep thinking about it and making sure it's in there, or do you just write the book and it's in there? Or do you add it in later?
It's a great question, and you know, all of the above, but I would say that the short answer is, I would say I write in spirals. So if I begin to realize something, I may go back and work it in earlier, because you need to leave your breadcrumbs. You need to it has much more meaning, even if the reader isn't consciously remembering, oh, there was a scene in which something happened with, but it's built into the emotional experience of reading, that it has an integrity then, an organic nature, that each, let's say this question of breath, then when the reader encounters it later, it's already full of meaning, right? So sometimes when that begins to emerge, I go back and so I do it in spirals. It's fun. That's one of my secrets. So now everybody knows.
Right. And does your editor pick up on that and know to look for it, or you don't discuss it and you just see?
No, I've mostly just had like copy editors at this stage. I mean, I had developmental editors early on. Actually, that's not true. The early stage of this book, I worked with the most amazing mentor named Sandra Schofield. And as the book was emerging, and she kept pushing me to go further. She did that, actually, she was with for all my books. And I took some risks in this book. Some of the scenes were a little risky for me to write, and she pushed me to go for it. The other thing she is very good at pushing me on was when a character was two-dimensional, she said, you have to find the reason to love this character. Every character has to have something human, worthy of love and respect. And she pushed me to, for example, in Queen of the Owls, the sister was originally very flat. And so that's how I use my editorial, not so much with the actual writing, but pushing me to go deeper, to excavate what the potential in the character or a scene, if that makes sense.
And all of your characters seem like they're three-dimensional. They're very real people.
So.
And there's not, you don't have any villains in your stories. They're all real people with good and bad qualities. Did you decide to do that on purpose?
Well, I think, like, for example, in The Color of Ice, so there's this art dealer guy, Nelson, that tempts her in a way, but he's not a villain. His offer is a temptation to her that she would then sort of abandon her journey. So he's the vehicle for that, but he's not a bad person. And he just sets up a choice for her. But I actually, because of my training, probably as a therapist and a teacher and all of that, that I don't think we all have good and bad in us. So our struggle is between different desires or fears internally, and the other people maybe evoke those moments of choice. But I'm not interested in having like bad guys, like a kidnapper or a,
right. It's a lot of inner struggle.
Yeah. But the other characters are necessary because the inner struggle can't just come from thinking. It has to come from something that happens to her in the story, which might be initiated by another character who is acting out of what they feel is the good,
Right. Now, do you know the endings of your books before they happen?
Well, every single one of the books, I had a general idea of I knew kind of where I was headed, but the actual ending, especially this one, only made itself known to me when I got to know the characters better. I think there's something about, you have a story idea, so you know where you're headed, but the deeper you get to know your characters by living with them, the more you can see the fullness of how the book needs to end. Like in Queen of the Owls, you might remember the final scene where she goes with her sister to see the exhibit of the photos she had posed for. I didn't know that until I got there. I knew she would go off to another city, but that particular scene, which was so special. And of course, in this book, the actual surprise ending of that just was, again, I'm using the word magic, but it really was, it was just an intuitive, I knew the climactic scene. I didn't exactly know how it would resolve from that.
Right. I guess that makes it fun to write if you're not exactly sure how it's going to end, because then when you get there, it's kind of exciting that you're sort of reading it and writing it for the first time.
Well, it's true. It's not like paint by numbers where like you have every single thing all mapped out. I mean, I do have a huge outline and I'm constantly expanding it as I work.
You
Um,
do.
Yeah,
Okay.
oh yeah, and I expand from the middle as I work. Just it's the outline is really a summary of anything. And I go back and I get rid of something and I change it. But um, but it's not like you're just filling in the blanks of something that you've got this, it's a discovery. And it has to do with honoring and being true to the characters and their story. And this is why you can get from what I'm saying tonight that it's a process that requires 200% of you, in my experience. Which is why now, like it's taking me a long time to let go of these characters because
In the Color of Ice, as opposed to the other two books.
yeah, I just couldn't bear to let go of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, you've talked about the other two books a little bit, but can you give just a brief overview of The Queen of Owls and The Sound Between the Notes, just so people, if they haven't read them, they'll know a little bit about what it is?
Sure. Queen of the Owls, there's no owls in it. The owl is because she sees herself as this owlish, bookwormy. Okay. So it's framed around the art and life of Georgia O'Keeffe, and the woman is studying O'Keeffe academically, and she meets this charismatic, actually another photographer, who tells her that she'll never understand O'Keeffe with her mind. She has to live and do what O'Keeffe did, which is to replicate her nude photos. So things happen from there. Okay. Sound Between the Notes is about a woman who she's an adoptee, and she set her career as a pianist aside to raise her kid because she feels that she has to put motherhood first. And then she's given this second chance she hadn't planned on to resurrect her career and all the things that come up from that, including a journey back into her looking for the connection with her birth family that she had painfully had to abandon. So this second chance as a pianist is the catalyst for all these unresolved parts of her life.
So, and to prepare for these books, you played the piano, which you already played, but you practiced the piano. And for Color of Ice, you went to Iceland, which was before, but that's still, it was part of the preparation that you didn't know you were doing at the time. And then
Right.
the glass blowing. I'm not going to ask you what you did to replicate nude photos.
No. I always tell people not yet. No, but I did go to all the places where O'Keeffe lived and worked. I talked to people who had even known her. I went to, there were all kinds of exhibits going on by coincidence. And in fact, this is kind of funny. The Queen of the Owls was really about her little known Hawaii paintings. She went to Hawaii, O'Keeffe, at a point when her career was at a standstill, her marriage was a mess, and she kind of rebooted. So I actually went to Hawaii. Poor me, I know, but that was just a weird coincidence. So, I mean, I think it's important to do this research through your body in a way. Like I went to see the Northern Lights for Color of Ice. I had to go see them because I wanted to at least try to be authentic. I mean, I also did a lot of library type research, I mean, it's not just, but both kinds. It's very important to me to certain scenes that you can only write if you are sort of, you have the sensory data also available.
So what is going to be next?
I don't know.
I mean, pick something great.
Yeah, I really don't know. This has been such an intense few years for me. And it seems right that there's a kind of pause right now. I've poured out so much of what I have learned about life and relationships and being human. And it's been quite something, and it's been great. I mean, the books have been well received. And so, yeah.
It's interesting because I think if you were 25 years old, you couldn't have written these books.
No. Luckily, I'm 27. No.
That's right. That's right. We all are.
Right, that's right. In dog years or something. But but yeah, there is something about a sort of, I mean, I'm not saying that one a young person can't write a great book, but the kinds of books I write, something has to be digested, and I have to become less judgmental of people in order to write these characters. And I don't think I could have done that when I was, 30.
What kind of therapy did you practice? What kind of patients? Children or adults? I'm
So
just
this is the question for Amy. I know she's here. Is that in the chat? Yeah. Well, I started working with families of kids who had gotten labels of disorder because they were different. Because I was struggling with that with my own child, obviously. And I got very passionate about depathologizing people who were different, who didn't fit into the little mold we have in our schools and everything. And actually, I wrote a book for parents, 2008, called When the Labels Don't Fit. And I became this, champion. I went around the country and talking about how to understand what makes these kids tick instead of trying to fix them, And so then my work was really with the parents, because part of that also was, I ran these parent groups called This Isn't the Child I Dreamed of Raising, to have parents accept the child they had, which is the first step. And maybe it wasn't their dream. But so I really found all that to be so, so powerful. And then later, I taught clinical practice to grad students. And so I really worked with understanding the whole person. That was my approach as a professor, as a therapist, as a researcher. So yeah, I mean, it completely flows into novel writing, doesn't it?
Well, it does in a lot of ways, because you've studied people and then you're writing about people, and the best way to write about it, from knowing all different angles. I mean, you've been studying the people for a long time, so it all comes through in the writing, which is really great.
Yeah, you don't realize it at the time, like when a kind of research I did was I interviewed people who had mental illness labels, adults, and wanted to find out their stories of what it was like for them. So here's a story about Queen of the Owls. I'm talking about that a lot tonight for some reason, but I interviewed this woman who had what was later then called Asperger's. And I remember she said to me, "I'm not like other birds. I can turn my head around. I can see in the dark. I'm like an owl, but I'm the queen of the owls." And I remembered that empowering statement of this woman, and I saved it in a way, and I think all my titles have had some origin story. The Color of Ice, there's a lot of books called The Color of, but I was determined to use that title because the blue ice has a meaning. The blue is the color that forms deep in the glacier. It takes 100 years of change and compression and and the melting away of everything else for this blue to appear. So for me, this Color of Ice had to be the title of this book, just like all of my titles have come from, something in my experience and like a metaphor for me.
Right. And now that's a perfect segue. I'd love to invite you to share your screen to show us some photos and to tell us a little bit more about Iceland and glass blowing, whatever you would like to
I
share.
thought this would be fun. It would be something different. And then we can open it up to other questions, of course. So let's see if I can make this work. wait a minute, maybe it's here. Okay, there it is, yes?
Excellent. Yeah.
Okay, so there's me with these earrings. This is a thing I have to tell you. I wear these for every event because they were made by this incredible glass artist in Scotland, and they're icicles, right? So they're ice and they're icicles and they're glass. So of course, when I found out I had to have them, duh, you know.
That's great. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah, they're awesome. Okay, so I had prepared this, and of course, we may have talked about some of these questions, which I think in a way, Jen did ask me this. So the question is all of them. Can you see all the photos, even with our little heads?
We can. Yes.
Okay, because I can, as long as you can. So there was, these are all photos that, except for the one on the right that I took. So it was Iceland, as I mentioned. There was the magical art of glass blowing, and there was this theme that came to me. So these three things sort of came together. So these are all photos that I took in Iceland. Iceland is known as the land of 10,000 waterfalls. And this is Gilfoss. Actually, I'm sorry, it should have been Godafoss. I put the wrong, this is wrong. It's Godafoss, which is figures in the story, which I visited. And so she has a particular experience there. I'm glad I caught that. Okay, and that's Jökulsárlón, this blue iceberg lagoon where she meets Mac. And as I've talked about, and this is one of the many photos of Heverir, which is this wild place up in the north that has these underground hot pots that bubble up like little mini volcanoes and emit steam, and everything there is like this ochre mud, and you just feel like you're not on the earth, as I said. So this is Iceland. It's a wild place. And yes, that's the one picture of me. And the icebergs really are blue. And actually a story about this photo, and that's not Mac in the background. That's my partner, a real person, not a glass blower, an ex-lawyer. So, this is the one photo someone said, oh, let me take your picture. And so I'm glad I had it. But I took off my hat for the picture because I don't know, I just took it off. And it actually inspired this little moment, if you might remember in the book, when Catherine is taking Mac's photo. She's there to do this shoot of him as a sort of representative of these artists in this art collaborative. And she says to him, take off your hat. And he says, take off yours, which is of course symbolic of reveal yourself. And she does. And this line came to me, there was nothing between the top of her head and the beginning of the world. And it's just one of those special lines. And so it was that moment that really allowed me to find that line. It's kind of neat. Okay, here's some more pictures from Iceland. On the left is what's called Diamond Beach, is these blue icebergs that you've seen. They drift through this lagoon out towards this beach, and eventually they either melt or they go out to sea. And this is called Diamond Beach, and it's like, I called it like the graveyard, of these, a way station of these blue icebergs. And the green, the light, all of this. The middle one is the ice caves that I visited, which Catherine never did get to. And this is this incredible place that's hand carved through the glacier that you get to go and walk through. And what's really cool about it is that each layer of ice is formed over time. So if you look at it, you see the history of the glacier from the inside and all the things that happened. And again, another metaphor. There's time. There's a lot about time in the book. And so on the right is just another of these gorgeous fields with the little waterfall and the farmhouse. And, Iceland is green. Greenland is made of ice. So, and here's some more. Oh yeah, more sheep than people. I mean, you can see why I took not thousands. I took a couple of hundred pictures while I was there. And so it was easy to look at them and have it all come back to me. And here's some more shots of Hebrier, that you get a sense of this, how this being with Mac in this, they take a little day trip, which is sort of where something begins to change in their relationship. And just how this atmosphere of this landscape that they were sharing, this impressions, created this something between them that anyone who hadn't been there wouldn't have understood. So this is
it's amazing how the colors in each of these different photos that you're showing are so different. I mean, and it just looks so different. It looks like all different places.
It's all part of Iceland. These are my own pictures.
Yeah.
These two were taken by a friend of mine, but in Iceland. When I was there, it was too early in the season for the lights. I actually saw them in Alaska, but these are taken in Iceland by a friend of mine. And of course, they figure in the book very much. I won't spoil it. So then the other thing about glass blowing, I went to a lot of places to see the glass art. On the left is an early Dale Chihuly. In the middle is Lino Tagliapietra, who's probably the most beloved glassblower in the world. Chihuly considers him his master. And on the right are two of the pieces I loved. I saw them at Corning from the early studio glass movement. I won't get into all that, but these are some of my favorite pieces, very different. And then, oh yeah, here's some more that I saw. These are all Chihuly's. I went to the Chihuly Museum in Seattle. They're just incredible. The one in the center is from the Shantz Gallery in Massachusetts. And here are two, oh, sorry. So here, this is a wild story. So when I was researching glass, I went to the Corning Research Library and I asked the research librarian, was there any glass blower who'd ever tried to convey the blue icebergs in glass? Like, I wanted, and she found this person for me. He'd been to Antarctica, but nonetheless, this is an iceberg series he did, Peter Bremers. So being me, I wrote to him and he wrote back. We became great friends. He's a wonderful person, amazing artist. He spent a couple of hours on Zoom with me. So these are some of his iceberg sculptures made of glass that I think Mac would have liked. This was after I'd already written the first draft. This was that summer. And here I went to see two of Peter's Antarctic iceberg pieces in person up at the Shantz Gallery. And Jim Shantz was just great. He let me touch them and all this stuff you wouldn't be able to do in a museum. So you can see how incredible that was for me to see this stuff. And then, of course, I went back to Seattle and I took a lesson. I have so many pictures. Of course, I'm masked in all of them, but it was really cool. And I ended up making this wonderful piece with a little help from this woman, obviously, right? She was there every step of the way, but this was really fun. And then the other part I'm going to add is that now it is December 6th, and it's just in time for the Icelandic holiday of Jólabókaflóð, which is a tradition in Iceland of giving books and chocolate at the holidays. And apparently this came about in 1944 because in World War II, there was a shortage of a lot of commodities, but not of paper. So it's been going on ever since. And so you're supposed to sit in front of like the fire, drinking chocolate, hot chocolate, and reading your new books. And so I had to get the t-shirt with the earrings again, notice the earrings, with the t-shirt. And so we're going to do a little giveaway that Jen will tell you about, that you'll have a chance to win a little swag bag of course, chocolate and a little icicle ornament for your Hanukkah bush or your Christmas tree or whatever you'd have, so I think that's the end of my slideshow. Yes, thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I love that little holiday tradition of chocolate and a book in front of the fire. I mean, that's what's better than that.
What could be better?
So whoever's here, if you're interested in winning the prize, you can send an email to me, Jen at booknationbookclub.com, and just mention that you want to be in the running for the Iceland tradition. And we'll pick we'll pick a winner, a random winner, and Barbara will send something out to you.
Yeah, and I have to say, I'm counting on all of you to celebrate this tradition by giving books as gifts to your friends and family this December and eating chocolate. So you're all, just by being here, you are now committed to celebrating Yola Boca Flood.
I'm in. I love it.
Yeah.
That's great. Also, one last thing, when you are reading any of Barbara's books, or any books for that matter, if you could go onto Amazon and Goodreads and leave a review, it's really helpful for the author. It becomes suggested reading to other people that are on Amazon and Goodreads. So it's important for them, and it doesn't have to be long. It can be one sentence. It could just be stars. It doesn't have to say too much at all, but it's helpful to have that in the system.
Oh, I
So
was going to say, I read the reviews. They mean so much to me. Don't think we don't read them. I mean, because social media posts come and go, but their Amazon reviews, Goodreads reviews, they're like this, they're like a permanent record. You look back 2 years later too, you know?
right.
Yeah.
Right. And especially like for these books where you can tell it has a lot of you in it. I mean, it's not just your imagination coming up with the story. It's about you. If you've brought your experiences and your interests and your talents into the story. So it's got to be meaningful, I'm sure.
Yes.
If anyone has any other questions that we didn't cover, put them in the chat. And I think if there's nothing more, I don't know, Louisa, anything to report back?
We have just a lot of celebration in the chat. No questions. You guys did such a good job of really addressing, I think, so much richness for these characters in the book that I feel like we got that. Sorry, I just had a little.
Catherine, you could unmute if you want
Catherine.
and ask your question yourself.
Thank you, Barbara. It's so nice to meet you. I do have a question which is a little off the beaten path, but first I just want to say something. I was quick flipping through my notes in the book, and on page 217, it's the page where Catherine accidentally breaks Mac's masterpiece. And the comment I wrote in was, "Notice with all the drama, there is no drama." And I was thinking, how did she do that? And I'm like, now I understand, because you're a therapist. I'm like, okay, I get that.
Yeah, what is interesting, I want to just say something about that. If you didn't read the book yet, you didn't hear what she said. But
oh, geez.
no, I'm just kidding. It's okay.
Okay.
I'm joking. No, I'm joking. It's not like the climax. It's just one thing that happens. Don't worry about it. I'm joking with you. But I feel very strongly about this, that as a writer, to leave space for the reader to have the experience. Why do I think that my readers are so stupid? I have to tell them what to feel. It's so disrespectful. So isn't it better to leave you space to feel yourself, to experience it right along with her, without, it's something as a writer, I feel very, very strongly about, because think about it. When you read, you want to read what Catherine is experiencing, but you also want to have your own experience. So thank you for saying that the drama was not so much melodrama. It was
extremely well done.
But you felt it. You felt it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that could have been my favorite part. But I did want to ask you a question, and this is a little bit related to me, because in the last 6 to 9 months, I have been studying quartz. And quartz is made of silicon dioxide, and glass is made of silicon dioxide. And I wonder if you have had any experience with quartz, because I think you would find it fascinating. What I've learned is that in some of the quartz, it holds fragments that hold rainbows, and some people talk about it as frozen light. And so the whole time I was reading your book, I just kept thinking about this quartz.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
One specific type of quartz called a zestolite is my very favorite. So you gave me a great gift with a book. I leave that gift for you. Go check out Azeztulite. I think you'd really like it.
So that is so cool. No, I didn't know. But I mean, I found myself very interested in all the things about glass, because you can look at a piece of glass sculpture and you can see all sides at once, front and back,
Yes.
for
Yes.
example. So it's
Yes.
very cool. Thank you. That was neat.
Thank you.
Catherine, will you put the name of that quartz in the comments, please? And also, if anyone's been to Iceland, I know some people might have mentioned it, but put that in the comments too, because I just like to see what, and if you've ever done glass blowing for that matter.
Someone did say, Susan said she loves Iceland and that she'd been there twice.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, everybody wants to go now after when they read the book, even if they haven't been. But it's so great. It's a wonderful country. I mean,
I keep talking about it, and my husband today was like, why do you keep talking about Iceland? And then I told him, well, the book that we're talking about tonight takes place in Iceland. He's like, no wonder, because I've been mentioning it like every day, and somebody I know is there right now and is posting pictures. And so I keep saying, we should go to Iceland. We should go to Iceland.
yeah. Well, I hope some of you do, and I hope that you all enjoy the book and get from it what it speaks to you, and let me know. You can write it in the Amazon review, or you can just email me too. Also, I love hearing from people.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Barbara. This has been really great. We've learned a lot. Here's the book, everybody, who you all know it probably. We've all read it, but just like to see it. And I wore my blue to match. And so thank you for being here, and thank everybody for being here. And
Barbara, thank you so much. I just want to say, that Bree's like, let's do a class trip for our Dance Express class. And I'm like, all right, we'll all go to Iceland. And I also just want to mention, because for my own interest, you had mentioned this Netflix series Blown Away. I loved it so much. I found reading your book, I was able to visualize everything so much because I had watched that series before that, and it brought a lot of richness to that experience. And as did your slideshow. For us to be able to see those works of glass was really special. So thank you for that.
Cool.
Thank you all so much for joining us again. Barbara, again, it was a pleasure to have you. I know many of us are looking forward to reading the other books that I certainly haven't read yet. So we'll look forward to that. Jen, thank you as always for gathering us and for being such a champion of authors. It's such a celebration of art. You do that for so many, and we appreciate it very much.
thank you. Thank you for all of your help.
Yep.
Have a great night, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.
I wanted to say, Jen and Barbara, this is such a special experience every time, but this one was just particularly lovely, not just because the book was so great, but to see all the pictures and hear the stories. And Jen, if I haven't said it enough, I find you such a thoughtful and talented interviewer. You've been so incredible to just, somebody mentioned hearing your insights, but just even then the kinds of questions that you ask, it's a real talent of its own to be.
That's so nice. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I said that to her as well, because I get so tired of people asking me this, who are your favorite authors? What kind of, do you drink coffee? Whatever. Her questions, which she had sent me in advance, and of course I didn't answer them in this way that she expected. But I thought, and I thought, wow, she really thinks about deeply, and a couple of things I had never thought about till she asked me. This is amazing. She's amazing.
Thank you.
The other thing I kind of wanted to say, I had spoken by email with Barbara just a little bit, is that I do think that therapists are all writers, kind of like not all, all Great Danes are dogs, but not all dogs are Great Danes. But there's something about therapists and writers that go hand in hand that maybe pretty much I would say all therapists have a thing for books, for reading and writing. It's something we really, really love, but it was so obvious in the dimensions of the book. And one thing I particularly loved is just, again, you were talking about the stick with the glass. It has to come off in just the right time so it doesn't shatter, and it's dangerous because it has to do its own thing when something is formed, and then it has to get cut off. That I was paying such particular attention to the whole idea of the individuation of children, and how much the theme of different themes of grief and loss and other kinds of things and guilt, but also just the individuation of children, and how much that theme was really really powerful around some of the different words that were even used to describe that. And I would leave that in the book to be discovered for those who hadn't read it. But it was very beautifully done about how everything in the book was about how we come into our own. And this, one of the things I asked Barbara is, wow, you must have a powerful story about raising children and individuation, because that was so pretty amazing to see. I was very called to that in the book.
Thank you.
Yeah, that there was a lot of really beautiful language that described the process, the glass blowing process, the glass itself, that represented more than just that.
I think what I see for me, probably one of the most powerful things was one of the questions you had sent me, Jen, was Catherine is said to be beautiful, but she doesn't feel beautiful. She doesn't
Right.
understand it. And when she begins to see the beauty in the world everywhere, as an artist, as someone who's open, she suddenly feels that her own beauty has a meaning. That just came to me also. And that was really a special, because we're all beautiful. We really are. And we have to own that.